Hi, and welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where two compulsive nut jobs read history memes and then research the backstories behind them, and then come forth and tell the other human what we've only recently learned, and hope that at least most of it is brand new to their ears, and you've joined
And
in to
true.
listen along. Yeah, well, I mean, now that you say that, I'm very concerned.
I'm totally kidding. You're welcome. And by true, I meant we can back that up with sources.
So I'm going to say my name and then I got a story. Well, I'm going to make you say your name too. I'm Teresa, and that's
I'm Angie.
okay. Story time. Skippers, skip ahead. I taught English in Japan for a couple years. One of the friends that I made over there taught English at a college. And so for him, it was either his high school or college class. Either way, he taught the same group of humans for 4 years.
That's cool.
And when they graduated, he had seen them for 4 years of lessons. At the last lesson, he stood in front of the class, straight faced, and said, "Everything I've taught you is a lie."
And how did they react?
Panic.
As you should.
Hmm.
But also with complete confidence, because anybody that's willing to say everything I've taught you is a lie generally is a fabulous teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I stand. So that's my soapbox, if you
Hmm.
will. My bit of wisdom for the day.
Angie for
Um,
professor.
that's me. Yep.
So,
I would be the type of professor. Have you ever seen the meme of like my professor today walked in dressed like this and it's this like mid-30s professor with his like khaki pants on and a hoodie and his beanie down to his eyes and a to-go cup of coffee filled with NyQuil and his response is, "I don't feel good today, class. You have until I finish this cup." That's me.
wow.
That's the type of professor I would be. Get convinced of that myself. Anyways, I just got so jealous of last story being all Teresa's story that I've decided it's an Angie takeover day.
Honestly, I'm here for it because I can just do needlework. So,
I love this for both of
knock
us.
yourself out.
Okay, well then I'm just gonna start off with my sources. The incredible story of a Vietnam War hero who survived 12 hours adrift at sea and tricked his POW camp captors into thinking he was an illiterate fool.
Oh,
That is, it was an article done for the Daily Mail by the Federal Observer author Keith Griffith. This was from February 17th of this year. There is a great article on, oh my gosh, I didn't put the We Are the Mighty, the wearethemighty.org website. I think
hmm.
we both cited it before.
Yep.
How a Sailor Remembered 250 Prisoners of War Through Song. That's by Blake Stillwell. It was done in December of 22. The Independent has a great article written by Flynn from Wednesday 11th of this year, of just this of December. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, how a Navy sailor fell off a ship, then became a Vietnam POW hero. And then the National Park Service has a site on POWs in American history that I thought was really, really fascinating if you have a chance. The National Park Service, as always, coming through with information you would not expect the National Park Service to have.
You know,
Um,
they truly are a resource that is underutilized and underfunded.
facts, facts, absolutely. And so full of good information and great social media
Right? Like,
personnel.
if you can't make it to a park, open their social media accounts and enjoy the dopamine rush.
Because we guarantee it, you'll have so much fun.
Yeah.
And then I looked at a few Wikipedia articles just to kind of understand the position and place of Vietnam in general because it's not sadly it is not a war we're taught much about and it's not one that I personally know much about. My dad was not there and the family members that I do have, I haven't had the opportunity to ask them about that moment in their life.
Yeah, the ones
So
I've asked, they're not too forthcoming with the intel. They just don't want to.
that's and I kind of don't blame them when you think about the reception that they received. So I did some digging because I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more. So, with all that said, I feel like my story today is kind of a deviation from my normal ones, and I think it is simply because it is so still very relevant today in the hearts and minds of a lot of people. And I didn't fully understand that until I watched a documentary that I'll mention in a little bit that like these men are still processing some of the things they've seen and some of the events that they went through, and they are still getting together with other members of their units and other prisoners that were at the same camp as them.
Mm,
And I think it's one of those things like, you know how when you see photographs of the civil rights, they're always in black and white because we're meant to think it happened longer ago than it did.
yeah.
I think it's similar to that, for, at least in my brain. So I don't know. I just learned a ton. Anyway, so just gonna get into it. Hegdahl, the main character of my event here, was born on September 3rd, 1946, in South Dakota to descendants of Norwegian immigrants. His family, they're devout Lutherans, and they spend his entire childhood in South Dakota. Like they're kind of what you would imagine to be that classic middle America family. Like he grows up playing sports, he's an athlete, he works in the family business. Kind of exactly what you would expect out of 1946 middle America.
Yep.
He spends his childhood in Clark, South Dakota, where he graduates from high school on May 24th, 1966. Immediately afterwards, he joins the US Navy. He wants to see Australia. And I just, to me, that's so funny. I love that that's the reason he chose to join the Navy. And the Navy, believe it or not, is totally prepared to grant him his wish. At least that's what the recruiter says.
I mean, here's where you get into the side eye because recruiters
Mm-hmm.
for the Navy or military in general,
Right.
yeah.
However, in this case, they kind of intended to, I think. They put him they I don't know how to word this. They assign him, I guess, to the USS Canberra, which is a guided missile cruiser that he was told would likely make port of call in its namesake, a city in Australia, during his time serving. So
Okay.
I think that's pretty cool. First of all, I didn't know that we named ships after other places like that. Like for some reason in my mind, they're all like the USS Roosevelt. Like I didn't realize there was place names of our allies in the ship naming
Convention. Yeah, I can't
catalog.
say I've
Yeah.
ever thought about it.
Yeah. Neither have I, and now I have questions. I would like to see the list. After the training and after advanced schooling, he attains the rank of seaman apprentice and then he boards the USS Canberra. He's trained and as a gunner's mate. However, before his ship can actually make it to the Great Down Under, where it was, quote, sent to patrol off the coast of Vietnam, where American intervention had rapidly escalated. So they're supposed to be heading to Australia, but they kind of get waylaid to aid in this very uncomfortable, tumultuous place that just is getting hotter and hotter by the moment, right?
Right.
And so he ends up in a place called Dixie Station. He's on board the USS Canberra. Now, for some context, this is the Vietnam era, and if you were as unfamiliar with this as I am, it's an armed conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, fought between the North Vietnamese, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and South Vietnam, the Republic of Vietnam, and their allies. North Vietnam is supported by the Soviet Union and China, with South Vietnam being supported by the United States and other anti-communist nations. So this conflict takes place between 1955 and 1975, and as we learn, thanks in part to the American CIA, Teresa beautifully covers this in episode 77 regarding the Hmong people. Some people are still fighting this conflict, unknowns to them that it's actually over. I highly recommend going back and listening to 77 because Teresa does such a beautiful job of describing these amazing people.
Bring tissue and understand it will wreck you. I do
In fact,
sob during that. Well, I don't think I sob, but I audibly cry. You can hear me
yeah,
having tough times.
I recommend it. Like, not just if you need a good cry, but just to educate yourself on the world that we live in today. But to circle back to Doug and the Dixie Station where he's sent, Dixie Station is a geographic position in the South China Sea. It's off the Mekong Delta. And from here, the U.S. Navy aircraft carriers, they're launching strikes and providing close air support for the American and their allied ground troops in South Vietnam. Now, for fun, and I did not know this, but Wikipedia says that, quote, Dixie Station was established on May 15, 1965 as a single carrier counterpart to the multi-carrier Yankee Station, which was located further north in the mouth of the Gulf of Tonkin and was responsible for strikes on North Vietnamese targets. Targets for Yankee Station were personally selected months in advance, sometimes by President Lyndon Johnson and the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. This results in notoriously restrictive rules of engagement. However, the Dixie Station's missions were carried out in response to requests for close air support by friendly ground forces engaging in enemy guerrilla warfare in South Vietnam. So they're kind of Dixie Station is kind of like the way that I see it visually anyway is kind of like the little brother to Yankee Station, and more in real time receiving like we
Yankee
need
is
your help at the
president.
moment.
Dixie is fly by the seat of your pants. So we have maybe, okay, we have a proactive reactive.
Yes.
Yankee
Yes.
proactive, Dixie reactive.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think this part is particularly entertaining. I spent so much time that I probably didn't need to, but I loved it, so you all have to hear it now. The name Dixie was chosen to match that of the phonetic alphabet designated Yankee, resulting in a pun relating to the traditional slang terms for northern United States and southern United States, with Yankee bombing the north and Dixie bombing the south.
Oh, oh,
I
wow.
spent way too much time learning about this. Um, but side quest to my side quest, I guess. If you give someone with ADHD the internet, they will go down every rabbit hole humanly possible and learn all the things. So, that to say, I learned two fun facts. The phonetic alphabet, commonly known as the NATO phonetic alphabet, is the most widely used set of clear code words for communicating the letters of the Roman alphabet, like alpha, beta,
You
whiskey,
know,
tango, foxtrot.
I have a story for you, speaking of.
Delighted. Hit me with
Okay.
it.
So I did not know that particular phonetic alphabet. I knew that it existed, right? So I needed to give, this was pre-marriage, I needed to give my maiden name in a response to like somebody on the phone.
Hmm.
And they're like, okay, how do I, because my maiden name was Detty. And they're like, how do I spell it? And I was like, dog, ugly, dog, dog, you. And they paused, and I could tell they were trying to be super professional. And they were just like, okay, I've logged it.
Is that you as in you, the letter, or you as in Y-O-U? Yeah. I can say that I know about that alphabet for a completely different and totally bizarre reason, but in my real life, I work in the automotive industry wherein you have to read VINs.
Hmm.
And so you learn very quickly that you're gonna need that alphabet in your noodle noggin for quick, easy speaking to people on the other end of the phone.
Yep.
What I did not know is that the words that were chosen for this alphabet are chosen because they are accessible to English, French, and Spanish speakers. Like, that was wild information I didn't formally have
So
before this week.
you're
So,
saying that the French and the Spanish speakers, Foxtrot and Yankee, define accessible, like within their grasp or easy to pronounce?
I suspect cl more closely related to within their grasp because all like French, Italian, and Spanish are all part of the same language
Language
base.
tree? Yeah.
So I suspect it's because of just ease of access,
Okay. Because I
but
was
it
just
works.
foxtrot. Oh, yes, but of course we say
It
foxtrot all
folks
the
truck.
time.
I now need to hear a Frenchman read the alphabet. Thanks. I gotta go. Um, so anyway, less than a year after our friend Hegdahl joins the Navy, um, I think this is such a fun tie-in. Before joining the Navy, he had never actually seen the ocean. Um,
Oh.
yeah,
Well, hello,
so
Sacagawea.
yeah, they're friends. And I am still, for whatever reason, when you told me her story, I accepted that as like fact to not argue with because why would she have seen the ocean? But for someone alive in the 1950s in America, why haven't you seen the ocean?
Okay. Counterpoint. He's in a landlocked state. If he's in LA and had never seen the ocean, it'd be like, sir, have you considered glasses?
Perhaps have you looked left anytime?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So I'm still kind of wrapping my mind around that, to be honest. But anyway, I digress. So imagine he's never seen the ocean. He is now serving aboard a naval vessel in the heart of like the Vietnam, like the beating heart of all of this
He
aircraft carrier
joined the
warfare.
Navy without seeing the ocean.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Let that sit there sink in for a second. Like, I have questions about why the Navy was your choice. But again, he said he wanted to see Australia, and I guess maybe in his mind, the Navy was the way to do that. But he's there less than a year. It's between April 5th and 6th, 1967. Sometime in the pre-dawn hours, the 20-year-old Higdall, his ship, it's about 3 miles off coast, he somehow gets knocked overboard by the blast from a 5-inch gun mount.
Oh,
Yeah. And I'll get to that in just a second. So what does he do? Well, he fashions some sort of life jacket out of his trousers, and then he swims in Trod's water until he's picked up.
wait a
We
minute.
are the
I
mighty.
learned how to do that in like sophomore PE. Did you not?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I think that we're all taught that, but yeah. Um, so, but in sophomore PE, we didn't have to do it for like 12 hours, which he did.
Yeah, I didn't have to do it
Um,
under duress.
yeah, definitely not under duress, definitely not in a war zone. Definitely not next to a battle cruiser that's mounting shooting off mounted guns every, few moments.
I couldn't do
Um,
my taxes, but I could make a ad hoc life preserver out of my pants.
Facts. Yeah.
So why didn't we learn how to get out of quicksand while we're learning useless?
Yeah, listen, I'm still pretty pissed about that because our childhood made it seem like it was going to be a far worse
Yeah,
event
this
as an
this was
adult.
going to be a common occurrence in my adulthood.
Yet to
Okay,
see
sorry.
quicksand.
Carry
Yeah,
on.
no, I agree with you. I've yet to see it, and I'm still ticked about it. So anyway, Higdall floats around there for about 12 hours before he's picked up by some Vietnamese fishermen who evidently treated him really well, but unfortunately they do turn him over to the North Vietnamese. At this point, I assume you have similar questions that I had. One being, how exactly does one get blasted off your ship? Um, the answer, I guess, is the force of the recoil because even he himself didn't know. He says, quote, I can't tell you how I fell from my ship. All I know is I walked up the deck, it was dark, and they were firing, and the next thing I recall, I was in the water.
That would be hair raising.
Right? Now, the other fact to this moment is no one can hear him scream because the guns are firing.
Ugh.
So he is looking at his imminent doom. He's 3 miles offshore, watching his ship blast and coincidentally move away. And so he's kind of thinking, oh heavens, um, what do I do? Which leads me to the next question. You might ask, how long does it take for someone on board to notice you're missing?
It
Mind
depends. Is
you,
he on the Kamchatka?
Dude, I thought about the Kamchatka at this point too. I was like, I don't know. If it's on the Kamchatka, nobody would notice for weeks.
Yeah, they're too busy sourcing the poisonous snakes that they've unleashed.
Yeah, they're counting them, not the people. Um, well, mind you, he did fall into the water in the pre-dawn hours. He was reported missing at 11:30 a.m. at ship's muster.
This is why they have muster.
Yep, they searched the ship twice and they thoroughly search it. And officially, after the second search, they list him as missing as a result of loss at sea and they provide for him a funeral
I
because
mean,
that's what you do.
yeah.
Now, the North assume him to be some sort of spy for the CIA. Now, unfortunately for him, or rather fortunately for him, he has no ID. So he can't prove where he's from. He can't. Nothing that you would normally say, oh, like I serve on this, like this is where I belong. They're just like right over there. Like if you could just call my mom and have her come pick me up, that'd be great.
Right.
That's not gonna work for him. So our boy looks around and he starts thinking real fast. And I have to give you this quote from the Federal Observer because it makes me laugh so hard. Quote, I had probably the most embarrassing capture story of the entire Vietnam War, Hegdahl recalls in an interview for the 1997 documentary Vietnam POWs Stories of Survival. I found that my defense posture was just to play dumb. Let's face it, when you fall off the boat, you have a lot to work with. So he is taken to the Hao Lao prison, better known to the men as the Hanoi Hilton. Nearly all the other prisoners there are captured pilots, and he's an enlisted man and would be at this point considered among the most junior men there. Not only that, but he's also like the youngest. So he's not an officer, he's an enlisted man, and he literally just fell off the boat.
So are
And at
you
this
going to
point
tell
has
me
no
that
pants.
even in a like a POW camp that officers were treated better?
Um, I wouldn't say they were treated better. In fact, in this camp, by the standards of the guards, the officers were treated worse.
Okay.
What I did find really interesting, and I don't know why I had never thought of this before, but rank still matters.
Yeah.
So even though they're prisoners, there are ranking officers above you, and you still take your orders from them, despite the fact that they're sitting in the cell next to you.
I could imagine the sass you could give. Oh, what are you gonna make me drop a 220? I'd love to sweep the sunshine off the sidewalk. However, sir, I'm kind of relegated to behind these bars.
Little busy at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so here's where he really drives home his quote unquote how stupid he is. The prison guards want him to write out these propaganda statements condemning the US. He had evidently seen some of the other officers' writings here, and he quickly figures out they're obviously coerced. Like, in the documentary, there's one of the officers gives some pretty outlandish comments about things that the North Vietnamese wanted him to say. And at one point, he even says that he was both laughing and crying because the believability of some of the stuff that they were coming up with was just asinine. He was like, there is no one that's going to know these comments are true. Like, you're just kind of making a bunch of BS up here. They're going to know this is false. But anyway, so he sees this and he realizes his best bet is to happily agree. So he does. The guards are delighted. And here's where we see that moment in every kid's life where they purposely annoy their mom by asking them how to spell every single word. You know the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Um, so every word the guard dictates for him to write, he asks, how do I spell it? And then proceeds to make it super illegible and chicken scratchy. So now he is pretending to be illiterate. And he keeps telling them that he's just a quote unquote poor peasant from North Dakota. At this point, he becomes known to the guards as the incredibly stupid one. The guards, because they see him as this sort of pot of gold because he's an American willing to do their bidding, they're like, heck yeah. They bring a tutor in to teach him to read and write.
Oh my gosh.
right? But the guards soon find out that he's completely unteachable. He is simply unable to grasp the most rudimentary elements of writing. They even start to think that he can barely see. So they sort of give up this like propaganda piece on him. Like they realize they can't use him to write these pieces against the US because he simply cannot do it. Um, Not only that, though, because they're convinced he can't see, they take him to get him fitted for new glasses. And while they do that, he memorizes the route from the prison to the actual city of Hanoi.
Dang.
So now, much to their detriment, they're assuming he's completely harmless and basically let him roam free. He's even tasked with like sweeping up around the place. I don't think at any point they told him to mop the rain away or sweep the sunshine, but they just kind of gave him a broom and let him go about his day. Now, all the while, though, he's memorizing everything, including the location to the front gates of the prison itself, and he's later able to give all of this information to U.S. intelligence. Now, give me a second to tell you a little bit about his roommates, or cellmates, if you will. First, he shares a cell with Air Force Officer Joe Caracca, who took the time to teach Higdall the name and other personal information of the 256 other POWs in the camp. He shares their names, he shares information like capture dates, their method of capture, and personal information that you would be able to confirm their identity with, like the name of their favorite dog.
Oh,
And then he, after being with Crocker for a while, he moves into the cell of Dick Stratton, who is one of the ranking officers for the time. And like they take to each other like a fish to water. And Dick Stratton realizes that our guy, Doug Hegdahl, has all this information in his brain and he's trying to figure out how to best keep it there. So he's like, put it to a song. So Hegdahl remembers the name, capture date, method of death, and personal information of 256 POWs to the tune of Old McDonald.
okay. So you have all this. Now, here's what I'm imagining. Bro finally gets out and he has to sit down with some intelligence officer for 3 hours as this
I'll get to that.
poor human is stuck with a nut 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 and a nut 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 and I am going to break every speak and spell I ever come across because of this stupid song. Carry on.
hmm Could you imagine not being able to sleep at night because that's the song stuck in your head?
I've had a
So,
toddler with said speak and spell.
right, okay. Um, so to me, the North Vietnamese here, because of their assumption that he's just this illiterate fool, they really set themselves up for failure over and over again. At one point, Stratton once asks Hegdahl, "What do you do when you lose your weapon? You either become a chaplain or an intelligence officer." And I find that really poignant, and so did Hegdahl, because he took that information and remembered everything he saw. The other thing that's really interesting is that the POWs at this camp have a tap method to communicate with each other that I personally would love to know more about. There wasn't like a ton of understandable for me information out there, but I know it is out there. And I just think that's really kind of fascinating. I assume it works something like Morse code, but I'm
Yeah,
not positive.
that would make sense to me.
Right? But meanwhile, back at the prison, he's sweeping about, minding his business. The guards are so comfortable with him that they just, take their afternoon siestas while he's sweeping the lot. And while they're doing this, he is able to slowly add dirt to the gas tanks of their truck, multiple trucks. Stratton would later say, quote, Doug Hegdahl, a high school graduate from the mess decks, fell off a ship and has 5 enemy trucks to his credit. He goes on to say that Hegdahl is one of only 2 men he knows of who destroyed enemy equipment while a POW. Then Stratton says, I am a world famous Golden Dragon VA 192 with 2 college degrees, 2,000 jet hours, 300 carrier landings, and 22 combat missions. How many enemy trucks do I have to my name? 0. And to me, that just kind of solidifies how highly they thought of each other because Stratton could very easily be one of those people that you totally imagine in the Top Gun movies that's just the
The
hot shot,
Iceman. Yeah.
right? But he really, really appreciated Hegdahl. This is the point with which I chose to watch the documentary because I needed to know more. And one of the main things that I learned is there is a code of conduct when captured amongst the POWs, and all servicemen, um, I don't know how I didn't know this, but unknown to me, despite the fact that they're all prisoners, like I mentioned this earlier, they still hold their rank and respect is given as if it were a normal day at base. The most senior ranking officer at the time was Naval Officer James Stockdale, who, believe it or not, in 1992, on the ticket of Ross Perot, would run for vice president. But Officer Stockdale puts out an order saying, quote, I put the word out, no Fink release, except no amnesty. We all go home together. And he forbids anyone from accepting early release from the Hanoi Hilton.
Uh,
Go ahead.
all for, I mean, I get that he's going for the all for like the Three Musketeers kind of oath, but
Well, so here's the thing that I didn't mention earlier. There are a lot of prisoners there that have been there for years. And there are prisoners there that need like very active medical treatment now.
right.
And so Stockdale's thought on this is that if they're not going home, none of us are. Like get
Gotcha.
them out first, right? So I mean that kind of work that makes sense to me. But for one reason or another, like to sow dissent or break morale amongst the men, the guards would talk about letting some prisoners go. And the prisoners that accepted the guards' proposal were considered rat finks and a traitor to the others. Now, like I said, that seems kind of harsh to us. But in the documentary, it kind of makes sense. They were really fighting for the men that have been there, the men that have been dying, the men that have been beaten and tortured in ways we cannot imagine.
Right.
They're fighting for them. So I get it. Well, in the case of Hegdahl, he's given the opportunity. And the superior officers among the POWs tell him, in fact, to get out. They order him to leave because that way he can get the information he's memorized back to the US. The first time he's asked, he defies direct orders and says no because, again, to him, it's an honor thing. The second time, he's realized, okay, yeah, he can actually help turn the tide here with the information that he's got going through his head to the tune of Old MacDonald. So he goes. In fact, the Federal Observer says that he, quote, was hesitant. He did not want to be a tarred, brashed with a go home early label, but to take the order despite the taste it leaves in his mouth because he knows he can help. So Higdal and two other men are released on August 4th, 1969. So he's been there at minimum 3 years,
Mm,
right? During his debrief, he recalled all the info via a song to the interviewer, who was absolutely gobsmacked. As you said earlier, like, I'm sorry, what? The speak and spell's gotta go.
yeah.
The interviewer asks him, hey, can you slow down? And Higdal responded with, quote, no, it's like riding a bicycle. You tip over.
I mean, I get it. At that point, it's just like, just record it. So we both don't have to go through this.
Right? 3 decades later, he could still remember the song. And in the 1997 interview, he sings it for you.
Oh, I bet it's
I
burned into his brain.
right? But his actions turned the tide for the rest of the POWs. At his release, We Are the Mighty says that not only did Higdal recite the names of the 256 men who were shot down or captured in North Vietnam, he could say their dogs' names, kids' names, and or social security numbers. They were the means by which other POWs verified the information given. He picked up all of this information through the tap code, deaf spelling code, and secret notes. Not only this, but at the Paris peace talks in 1970, he was able to accuse the North Vietnamese of torture and murder. He even went so far as to accuse them of murdering Dick Stratton, which would ensure that Lieutenant Commander Strachan made it home at the end of the war,
Wow.
because now it's visible to the public, right? And almost immediately, the rest of the prisoners back home at the Hilton Hanoi begin to receive better treatment. So So that's pretty cool in and of itself, but for him, I think the thing that solidified the most in his mind is that he's allowed to change, like his actions change the title for some of these men from missing in action to POW. So their
Yeah.
wives know they're still alive.
Yeah.
Um, and in the documentary I watched, there was some pretty powerful moments where there was an African American pilot. I all of a sudden blank. I should have wrote his name in my notes, but he could sing, and so the guards at at the prison asked him if he would help them put on like a little choir show for propaganda piece to show that they are in fact treated so well and they can have church service and they can sing and blah 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 blah. And this pilot obviously doesn't want to do that because that's not true, right?
Right.
Like my men aren't happy. They're not comfortable. They're not safe. They're not fed well. They're not looked after in any sort of real way. Why would I do that? When one of his commanding officers there in the camp points out, if you do this, if you give them a choir, if you let them film this propaganda piece, then wives will know their husbands are still alive.
Yeah.
Pack that room full. And that is so big to me to like figure out how to tell people's families that your sons and your husbands and your brothers are still alive when up to now all you have is pretty much radio silence from the US government because they don't even know.
Well,
Like that's a pretty big deal.
you know what that reminds me of? It's now on Netflix. But did you see the 6888?
No, I think that's in my to be watched.
Okay.
That's the postal gals, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But the concept is the mail wasn't getting out for months and months and months to or from the front lines of World War II.
Right.
So nobody knows that their loved ones are alive. And the guys at the front lines, they have no morale because they think their family and friends have forgotten about them.
Because why wouldn't that be the thought you
Yeah,
make when
they're
you're not
out of
receiving
sight,
any
out of mind.
letters? Yep.
And so just
Yeah.
having that hope.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. You're not wrong. Um, I love this part. So the Independent says, quote, Roger Shields, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the POW MIA affairs from 71 to 77, explains in a book that after Higdall provided the names to the Pentagon, we told the North Vietnamese, you are responsible for the salvation and survival of these particular men, thereby putting the onus on the Vietnamese in a way that had never been done before.
Wow.
All because this guy fell off a ship, got a concussion, and played dumb when he landed where he was. Coincidentally, the Independent goes on to say that on the same day that Higdall participated in his first post-release press conference, so he's speaking from Bethesda, Maryland. Ho Chi Minh himself dies, and this promotes a huge change of leadership that also coincides with more pressure on the communists from the Nixon administration regarding the treatment of POWs. It is worth noting that the final prisoners would eventually be released in 1973.
This is the only known to me incidents of weaponized incompetence that I'm okay with.
Right? I mean, he just nailed it. Higdall, in fact, receives an honorable discharge from the Navy on July 1 of 1970. He remains with the inactive reserves until 72, at which point he eventually achieves the rank of Petty Officer Second Class. He goes on to teach survival skills at the Navy SRE school for many years. One of the cool things that I read was that his parents, despite the fact that he was a POW for years, his parents kept his paychecks in a savings account for him. So when he got out, he was able to buy a little house in San Diego.
Wow.
hmm Um, so he's living in San Diego. He's teaching survival skills at the Navy school. And although other, early returns, they carry the stigma for accepting release before all the prisoners could return home, Higdall was always embraced by fellow POWs. And then Higdall and Stratton would remain friends. And as I understand it, they are both still alive today.
No kidding.
hmm Um, I do have a couple pictures, but I also have some added context here, provided thanks to the National Park Service. Um, During the longest war in American history, the Vietnam War, 766 Americans are known to have been prisoners of war. Of this number, 114 died during captivity. Unlike previous wars, the length of time as a POW was extensive for many, with some being imprisoned for more than 7 years. Torture was common, and the Geneva Convention was not followed, as the North Vietnamese claimed the Americans were political criminals, not prisoners of war. The documentary that I watched, actually, the North Vietnamese called them air pirates and war criminals.
Jeez.
Now, for a fun fact, Higdall and his two brothers grew up. They lived in Clark, South Dakota, working in the family business, which happened to be a hotel. The locals nicknamed the hotel the Higdall Hilton as an ironic nod to the fact that he served at the
Afterward.
Hanoi Hilton. I know. I think it was just I think it was before. Like that's just always what it was called.
Okay.
Um, and I love that that is a thing that happened. Um, and I do have a couple of pictures if you want to see them.
I am here for it.
Let me get my share screen going. Okay. Share my screen. So this first one is Higdall. He's got his broom and he's
He,
sweeping.
she is showing me a black and white photo of an extremely emaciated man with a broom
hmm
and very high
Now,
contrast to the point where it looks like this man's practicing a huge smoky eye, which he is not.
so in this particular photograph, I didn't mention this earlier, but like I had said, the North Vietnamese were big on propaganda, and at one point during his stay, they moved everybody to something called the plantation, which was a former French plantation that had much bigger accommodations, was much cleaner, much nicer, to sort of film this footage of the POWs looking like they're having a great day. That they're treated well, they're fed well, they're looked after well. So this shot is from that particular endeavor. And once again, while here, he proceeds to undermine everything they do. They would ask him to act a certain way, and he would pretend like he didn't understand. Or he'd be overly dramatic, or he'd be this, or he'd be that. But everything he did undermine what they were hoping to achieve. So they kind of, their goals were not met, to say the least.
I love this for him.
Here's his early Navy photo, and this photo on the right
Oh my
is
gosh.
him the day after he's returned home, or w
Okay.
within the week of him returning home.
So she's showing a quintessential sailor photo. Like we're talking the little white hat, the navy blue shirt, um, and then the picture immediately next to it. Okay, so first off, freshly enlist, dude is probably buck 90.
If he's
Freshly,
lucky, yeah.
yeah, right. Um, on the right side of him, released, it's black and white, but bro has like a pencil neck and the sharpest cheekbones. He has easily lost 50, 60 pounds.
At least, I mean, in the minimum. Now, below this, you'll see a photo of him and two others. That's Alice and her husband, Lieutenant Commander Stratton. This is in
Okay.
1973, just after Stratton's release.
So now him, after a bit of time, so which one is him?
He's the one on the far right with the glasses.
Interesting. Okay. So he has He's wearing these round glasses that I don't appreciate. They're very reminiscent of the villain from Who Framed
70s.
Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, yeah, they kind of are.
Yeah. And he's wearing a white shirt, white tie, dark sports coat, and then Stratton, he's got his arm around Stratton's wife.
Yes. So at least I think that's his hand on her shoulder. So,
Okay.
um, her and then Stratton just upon his release. I
So
think that
Stratton looks like he coached football in high school.
yes, yes, Stratton looks like what you would imagine Mr. Rogers to look like 30 years younger, I think.
Yeah, like he's got the high and tight haircut. He's got the physique that says he was a barrel-chested man in his younger years.
hmm
Wife Alice is, she teaches homeroom.
Yes, she does.
She
hmm
volunteers at the local church.
Yep, she counts the offering every Sunday.
Yeah, that's exactly what she looks like.
Yeah, whatever you're imagining, you're right.
Goes to the
It's
hairdresser every Saturday, gets her
yep,
blowout.
yep. Um, I'm not sure that he got to meet her before Stratton was released, but I know that their families remained friends um, long after this. So I think that because this photo was taken right after Stratton was released. Um, so I think that he's, it is odd that he does have his arm around her. I'm thinking that Stratton has his arm around him, but we just can't see that.
Okay. I mean, look,
Yeah.
it could also just be we're taking a photo, everybody get close. And then I'm reading a lot into 10 seconds of prep and photo, and then it goes into obscurity and nobody remembers who wore what.
Yeah. But that's the story of Doug Hegdahl, who fell off his ship and saved his POWs. What I find to be the most, I don't know, impactful part of the story is that National Park Service says in their write-up that there were 766 Americans known to have been prisoner of war. He helped 256 of them survive.
Holy crap.
Like,
That's a
to me,
huge
that's
chunk.
right. Like, that's a wild number, and it's wild to think that he sort of went with this whole stupid illiterate route for the sake of I'm just trying to stay alive and this seems like my best bet. I mean, I did fall off my ship and have to tread water, so I'm just going to take this ridiculous posture and see how far it gets me, but at the end it not only saved his life, but the lives of many, many more men. And
Oh,
I just love that. So there's my guy.
thank you. Because I
You're
think
welcome.
in passing, I'd read a memeified account, like getting it down to the length of a tweet, but didn't necessarily know the full story.
Yeah. I saw the headline a few weeks ago and I was like, wait, I need to know more. He did what? Pardon?
Wow.
Yeah. So that's my guy.
I love
Thanks for
this.
joining me. Thanks for letting me take over.
Yeah, no complaints, no regrets, because seriously, you've given me a week off.
I'm here for this.
I'm now gonna stew, and I'm just gonna apologize to everybody else who has old McDonald stuck in their head. Um,
Yeah, sorry about that.
you're not, and let's be honest, you don't need to be. But if you can't wait to hear the story that maybe Angie sidelined, rate, review, subscribe, circle back next week. We've got equally unhinged narratives that we're going to share. And yeah, come along for the ride. And on that note, goodbye.
Bye.